The night had fallen heavy over the old American forest, the kind of darkness that swallowed every sound and made even the bravest soul step carefully. Cold wind pushed through the tall pines, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant smoke. Somewhere between those whispering trees lay a young woman whose strength had been tested beyond its limits. Her breath was thin, her heart beat slow, her hands trembling against the rough earth. No one passing by would have guessed she once moved through life with a spirit brighter than any campfire flame. Now she lay half-conscious, fighting to hold on. Her wool shawl was torn, her braided hair covered in dust, and her cheek carried a bruise that told a painful story. She had been left there, not by strangers, but by people who had turned their backs on her when she needed them most. They told themselves she was too much trouble to carry forward, too weak to keep up with the journey, too costly to their plans. They never said the words out loud, but the truth lingered in their cold eyes. To them, leaving her behind meant letting the forest decide her fate. She remembered the moment they rode away, their horses kicking up clouds of dirt as their silhouettes faded into the trees. She had reached out trying to speak, but her voice cracked like dry wood. The pain in her body was sharp, but the pain in her heart cut even deeper. She had trusted them. She had believed they would stand with her like a family. Instead, she lay alone on the hard ground, the night closing around her. Though fear pressed against her chest, something inside her refused to surrender. Each breath reminded her she was still alive, still fighting. But her strength was fading fast. When she tried to sit up, her vision blurred. When she tried to reach for the fallen branch near her, her hand slid weakly back to her side. The cold wrapped around her like an unforgiving blanket. The forest did not care about her heartbreak. It did not care about the betrayal, or the fear, or the loneliness. It only moved the way it always had, shifting with the wind and shadows. Yet something unusual stirred that night. A small sound escaped her lips, more of a faint cry than a call for help, but enough for the forest to carry it far beyond the reach of the trees that surrounded her. That sound traveled to a ridge where an Apache warrior walked alone, listening to the land the way his elders taught him. His name carried weight in his homeland. He was known for moving with purpose, for reading danger before it arrived, and for stepping into trouble without hesitation when someone needed help. Wrapped in a fur-lined coat and carrying a bow across his back, he paused, suddenly. His sharp hearing caught something the forest rarely offered at such an hour. A broken voice, thin and desperate. He lifted his head, narrowing his eyes toward the shadows. The wind shifted again, pushing the faint cry against his ear. It was the voice of someone in trouble, someone hurt, someone abandoned. His heartbeat steadied into a firm rhythm. He could not ignore it. The Apache way taught that every life held value. No cry for help should be left unanswered, not when he had the strength to move. Without a moment of hesitation, he stepped off the ridge and started down the slope, boots sinking into softened earth. The forest seemed to guide him, letting the moonlight slip through branches to mark his path. The woman did not know anyone had heard her. She lay still, hoping sleep would give her a moment of peace, yet knowing deep down that closing her eyes might mean they would never open again. She whispered a quiet prayer into the cold air. She asked for a sign, for mercy, for someone who would not walk away this time. Her fingers twitched as she fought to stay awake. In the distance, the soft crunch of leaves stirred, too steady to be wind, too heavy to be a small animal. She opened her eyes slightly, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. She saw nothing at first, only shifting shadows between the trees. The Apache warrior moved closer, cautious but swift. He scanned the forest, hand resting lightly near the knife at his waist. He could sense danger lingering nearby. Tracks on the ground told a story of horses passing through recently, and not in a peaceful way. He crouched low, touching the earth, feeling the impressions left behind. The steps were hurried and uneven. Something had gone wrong here. His eyes shifted to the dim outline of a fallen shape against a large stone. He rose to his feet and approached slowly. When he came close enough to see her clearly, he stopped. Her face was pale under the moonlight, her breathing uneven, her clothes torn, but she was alive, barely. He knelt beside her, searching for any sign of what had happened. Her pulse was weak but present. Her wrists carried the marks of rough handling. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words disappeared before reaching her tongue. She looked at him with fearful eyes, unsure if he was there to help or harm. He leaned closer, keeping his voice calm. He told her he meant no harm. He told her she was safe now. But even as he spoke, he knew they were not yet safe. Whoever left her here could still be nearby. The forest did not hide the signs of men who acted with cruelty. He sensed danger circling in the distance like a hungry wolf following a trail. The woman blinked at him slowly, trying to hold on to consciousness. Her breath shivered as if the cold had carved its way into her lungs. She wanted to trust him. Something in his voice, steady and warm, pulled her away from the fear that had been gripping her since she was abandoned. But her strength slipped again, pulling her closer to darkness. The Apache warrior glanced around the forest once more. He knew he had only moments to decide. Leaving her here was not an option. But helping her meant inviting trouble his way. Whoever deserted her might return. This place smelled of conflict, of betrayal, secrets heavy enough to bring danger to anyone who stepped into the story. Yet he did not step back. He did not turn away. Instead, he slid one arm under her shoulders and lifted her gently, careful not to worsen her pain. Her head rested against his chest, and he felt how cold she had become. He wrapped his fur coat around her, hoping to give her some warmth, some comfort, some will to keep fighting. The forest grew silent, too silent. As he held her, he realized something else. Tracks in the dirt were fresh, very fresh. The ones who left her might not be far at all. They could be returning. They could be watching. They could be waiting for someone to find her. He tightened his grip, preparing to move when the faint snap of a twig echoed behind him. His muscles tensed. His breath slowed. Someone was out there, and they were not walking away. He turned his head slightly, keeping the woman close. His eyes focused on the shadows as a figure stepped between the trees, and that was the moment the real story began. The figure stepping out from the shadows moved with slow, careful steps, as though testing the air before committing to each one. The Apache warrior shifted his stance, keeping the young woman secure in his arms. He had no intention of letting fear shake him, but he could not ignore the danger crawling through the trees. The moonlight slid across the forest floor and revealed the faint outline of a man, wrapped in a coat too clean to belong to any traveler who lived off the land. The man froze when he noticed the warrior. His surprise was clear, though he tried to mask it by straightening his back. He called out, asking who stood before him, as if he expected his voice alone to command trust. But the warrior did not answer right away. He studied the stranger with sharp eyes, noticing the shine of metal at the man's belt and the quick rise and fall of his chest. Whoever he was not calm. And men who are not calm often acted foolishly. Before the stranger could speak again, the woman stirred weakly in the warrior's arms, her fingers curling slightly around the edge of his coat. Her eyes opened for a moment, just long enough to catch sight of the man standing a short distance away. Fear washed across her face. It was not the soft fear of uncertainty. It was deep, sharpened fear. The kind that came from recognizing someone who meant harm. The Apache warrior noticed it instantly. It told him everything he needed to know. He stepped back, putting a bit more distance between himself and the stranger. The man attempted to take a step forward, but the warrior raised a hand, telling him to stay where he was. The stranger hesitated, then stopped, shifting his weight uneasily. The air thickened as both men tried to read each other's intent. The warrior's instincts held firm. This stranger had something to do with the young woman being left in the forest. That much was clear. But he did not know if the man worked alone or with others nearby. He listened for movement behind him, for the soft rise of another shadow, for the crackle of branches under cautious feet. The forest felt crowded, even though he could see only one threat in front of him. The stranger forced a smile. It failed to reach his eyes. He claimed the woman ran away from her group. He claimed she had been causing trouble. He claimed they had searched for her. But every word carried the tone of a man trying too hard to sound like he cared. The Apache warrior had heard lies before, and these fell with the same hollow weight. He asked the stranger why she was injured, why she had been left cold, weak, and alone. The man stretched his story, adding excuses that made even less sense. His voice wavered. His eyes darted. His fingers brushed the metal at his belt more than once. The warrior responded calmly, but the firmness in his voice left no room for argument. He told the stranger to step back, far back, and not to follow. The man's jaw tightened, his pride bruised by the sharp command. But he backed away, inch by inch, until the shadows swallowed him again. Only then did the warrior shift his grip on the young woman and step deeper into the forest, moving swiftly towards safer ground. He did not know how much time he had. He only knew the forest carried too many footsteps tonight. As he traveled, the woman's breathing grew steadier, though her strength did not. Her head rested against his shoulder, and every now and then she whispered something he could not fully understand. Her voice was soft, but heavy with emotion. She did not speak long phrases, only small pieces, as if her mind was slipping between memory and fear. He finally reached a sheltered spot, between tall rocks, where the wind calmed. He laid her down gently, placing his coat under her head and checking her injuries again. Her pulse was weak, but stronger than before. Her lips trembled as she tried to talk. This time, a word escaped clearly enough for him to hear. She said the men she traveled with were not good men. He waited patiently as she fought through the fog in her mind. She explained that she joined their group, hoping for passage to a new settlement. She had no family left, and she believed traveling with others would keep her safe. But the men she trusted revealed their true nature once they were far from any town. They argued constantly, treated her harshly, and blamed her for any trouble that came their way. When she grew ill and fell behind, they made the cruel choice to leave her to the forest instead of helping her. Her voice cracked with shame as she spoke, as though she felt guilty for what had been done to her. The warrior listened, his expression steady, but his eyes carrying a heat that came from anger mixed with sorrow. Cruelty from strangers was one thing, but cruelty from those who held a person's trust struck deeper. The forest did not forgive such actions easily. He looked back toward the direction he had come. The stranger's face lingered in his thoughts, along with the clear fear the woman showed when she saw him. Whether the group planned something or simply fled without care, he could not know yet. But he sensed this story would not end quietly. The woman tried to sit up, but pain surged through her body and forced her back onto the coat. She apologized, though she had nothing to be sorry for. He reassured her gently, telling her she was not alone anymore. His voice carried the calm strength of someone who had faced hardship before and learned how to stand through it. He prepared a small fire in a controlled pit between the rocks, careful to let it burn low so its glow did not travel far. The warmth returned a bit of color to her cheeks. She watched him work, noticing the way he moved with purpose. He did not rush. He did not panic. He studied the world around him as if every sound told a story. Once the fire settled, he gave her a drink of warm water mixed with crushed herbs. He explained it would help ease her pain. She trusted him enough to sip it slowly. The relief came like a soft wave, loosening the grip of fear around her chest. For a moment, the forest quieted. The fire crackled softly. The wind rustled leaves above them. She felt a strange sense of safety, something she almost forgot how to feel. The warrior watched over her like a guardian, alert yet calm. But beneath that calm, he knew danger still lingered. The group that abandoned her did not strike him as men who would simply let someone slip out of their control. They had something to lose, something to hide. And a woman they had chosen to discard could reveal it if she lived. He sharpened his senses. Every shift in the wind, every snap of a distant branch, every echo bouncing through the trees. The night had many secrets, and some were walking on two legs. The woman's breathing eased, allowing her to speak more clearly. She told him about the arguments she overheard while traveling with the men. They fought over money, land, and a secret they carried in a heavy wooden box tied to a saddlebag. They guarded it fiercely, never letting her near it. The closer they got to the mountains, the more paranoid they became. She heard them whispering about betrayal, about being followed, about someone waiting for them ahead. She believed their fear pushed them to abandon her when she became a burden. The warrior listened closely. A guarded box. Fear of being followed. A group of men ready to turn on anyone. These were pieces of a larger story. One that reached farther than the cold forest floor. Suddenly, a distant sound cut through the quiet. A hollow thud. Then another. The warrior rose slowly, eyes narrowing toward the dark path that led back to the ridge. The woman felt her heart race, sensing danger returning. The sound grew clearer. Boots hitting earth. Not one pair. Several they were coming. The warrior took one silent step forward, placing himself between the woman and the path. His hand reached for his bow, his posture steady and unshaken. The forest waited. She held her breath, and the shadows moved again. The first rider stepped into view with his shoulders pulled back and his chin high, as if the forests belonged to him. Two more shapes followed, horses snorting white steam into the cold night air. Their coats were dusty from travel, their saddlebags heavy. The Apache warrior stood tall in front of the rock shelter, one hand steady on his bow, the other hanging loose but ready. The young woman lay behind him near the low fire, heart pounding as the glow flickered across the stone. The leader of the riders pushed his hat up and stared at the warrior with narrow eyes. His coat was trimmed neat, his boots polished better than any simple traveler's. At his side hung a revolver that had seen use. Behind him, the second man was lean with a sharp nose and nervous hands. The third was broad and silent, his gaze shifting between the trees, as if expecting ghosts to step out at any moment. The leader called out, pretending to sound friendly. He said they were looking for a woman who had wandered off in a daze. He claimed she was confused and unwell, that their group was only trying to help her reach a town. Every word rolled smooth off his tongue, but the warrior heard the rough edge under it. The woman behind him flinched at the sound of the man's voice, confirming once more what her eyes had already told him earlier. The Apache warrior answered with calm strength. He said the woman was under his protection now. He said she had been left to die in the forest. He asked why any good men would ride away from someone too weak to stand. The leader's friendly mask slipped for a moment, and in that moment, the truth showed itself. His jaw clenched. His fingers twitched near his gun. He forced another smile, but it no longer reached even the surface of his eyes. Tension stretched between them like a tight rope ready to snap. The horses shuffled, picking up the unease. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The leader finally admitted the woman had slowed them down. He said the trail was dangerous, that they could not afford delays. He spoke of wolves, hidden ravines, and hostile riders. He tried to paint himself as a man who had made a hard choice, not a cruel one. The warrior listened, but did not move. Leaving someone to die for the sake of speed was not a choice a man of honor made. The woman, gathering what little strength she had, called out from behind the rock. Her voice cracked but carried. She said the men were not to be trusted, that they had argued over stolen goods and a locked wooden box. She said they had threatened each other more than once. The leader's face darkened at her words. His calm tone vanished as he snapped at her to be silent. That outburst told the Apache warrior everything he needed. He adjusted his stance, making it clear he would not surrender her. At the same time, his sharp mind worked through the layers of trouble. These men were not just cowards. They were carrying something worth lying and leaving people behind for. Something that made them nervous in every shadow. Something that might draw more danger than even they expected. Far away. On the other side of the forest, another thread of trouble was weaving itself toward them. A worn stagecoach trail ran along a ridge, and a single rider followed it with determined focus. This man wore a star pinned to his chest, partly hidden beneath his coat. He was a lawman from a frontier town a long ride away, tracking rumors of a gang that robbed freight wagons and left bodies behind. The last whisper he caught mentioned a group of men traveling with a mysterious box and a woman who looked frightened every time they stopped. The lawman, a steady soul named Calder, knew this land only by second-hand tales. He read the ground as best he could, following the deep ruts of wagon wheels and the scattered hoofprints. Though he had never lived among Apache people, he respected their skill and hoped he would not cross any of their trails in a hostile way. He carried not just his revolver, but a quiet wish that this time, maybe, he could prevent violence instead of arriving after it ended. Back at the rock shelter, the leader of the group shifted tactics. He pretended to soften his approach. He said the woman must have misunderstood what she heard around the campfire. Long rides made people tired. Fear, twisted memories. He even offered the warrior a share of coin if he handed her back. That offer hung in the air like smoke. The warrior did not bother hiding his disdain. He needed no coin from men who treated a life as something that could be bartered. The leader's hand slid closer to his gun. The silent man behind him moved his horse slightly to the side, trying to position himself for a better shot if things turned ugly. The lean man tugged at his reins, his eyes fixed on the warrior's bow with nervous dread. He was clearly not as eager to fight, but fear of his own leader kept him in place. The Apache warrior felt the pull of two worlds in that moment. One was the quiet life his people tried to keep, far from the arguments and greed of settlers and drifters. The other was the rough path that appeared whenever those worlds collided. He knew that interfering in the matters of these gunmen might bring trouble back to his own camp. Yet he also knew that ignoring a wounded person left to die would tear at his spirit more than any danger from them. The woman behind him understood some of this from the way he held himself. She had never met anyone like him before, someone who stood firm without needing to shout. While the men she had traveled with used loud voices and quick threats to prove themselves, this warrior did not raise his voice. His strength was quiet, and that quiet strength made her believe she might still live to see another sunrise. She whispered her name, so he would know it if something happened. She told him she had once worked in a small frontier and carrying water, cleaning rooms, and listening to travelers share tales of goldfields, cattle drives, and faraway ranches. She had always dreamed of starting fresh in a settlement where people judged her by her work, not by her past. That dream had led her to join the very men now facing the warrior. The leader heard her speak and cut her off, telling her that her fate was not hers to decide. To him, she was a problem that needed to be removed, not a person with a story. That view of the world stood at the heart of the growing conflict. To the gang, people were tools and burdens. To the Apache warrior, every life had weight. Every choice carried a trail of consequences behind it. He asked the riders one final time to turn back and leave the forest. His voice did not waver. If they left, he said, no further trouble needed to come. For a heartbeat, it seemed possible. The nervous rider cast a hopeful glance between his leader and the trees. The silent rider studied the shadows, perhaps wondering if this warrior stood alone, but greed rarely steps aside once it tastes power. The leader thought of the box tied to his saddle back at their camp, hidden near a fallen log deeper in the forest. Inside lay bonds and coins taken from a freight wagon, enough to buy land and influence if they made it to the right buyer. He could not risk a witness. Not a woman who had heard their arguments and seen their fear, and not an Apache warrior who might lead others against them or speak to some lawmen on their trail. He rejected the warning. Instead, he gave a quiet signal with his hand. The silent rider tightened his grip on the reins. The lean rider swallowed hard. Weapons were inches from being drawn. The forest braced itself, while tension rose at the rock shelter. The lawman Calder reached the edge of a ridge and saw faint firelight far below between a stand of trees. He also saw the shapes of horses silhouetted against that glow. He reined in his horse and watched carefully. The pattern of movement did not look like a peaceful camp. Bodies stood stiff, not relaxed. One figure appeared to be shielded near the ground. He was too far to hear voices clearly yet, but the wind carried a tone that raised the hair on his neck. Sharp-clipped. Dangerous. Calder slid off his horse and led it forward quietly, using the ridge and trees as cover. He did not know who was down there, but he suspected this confrontation had roots tangled in the same trouble he was chasing across the frontier. He checked his revolver and moved with measured steps, ready to step in if lives hung in the balance. Back below, the Apache warrior weighed his odds. 3 riders, 1 wounded woman, uncertain distance to his own people. If he called out, there was a chance an Apache scout passing nearby might hear him, but he could not rely on that. He scanned their positions, the slope of the ground, the rocks he could use for cover if the first shot rang out. The woman gripped the coat beneath her, feeling guilt that he might risk his life for someone he had only just met. She whispered that he did not have to do this. She said she was tired of people getting hurt because of her. He turned his head slightly and told her she was not the cause. The cause was the choice those men made when they valued gold and fear more than a human life. That difference mattered, even if the world did not always see it. The leader finally dropped the last piece of pretense. His voice turned sharp and cold. He told the warrior that if he walked away and left the woman, they would forget they ever saw him. But if he stayed in their path, he would regret it. Those words were not just a threat. They were a declaration of how the leader moved through the world. Take what he wanted. Silence anyone in the way. The warrior did not step aside. Wind pushed through the trees, carrying the faint scent of horses from farther off. There were more tracks on the trail than just these three, meaning the rest of the gang might be circling nearby with the wagon and the locked box. The conflict now stretched beyond the rock shelter. It involved the stolen goods, the frightened woman, the Apache camp that might be drawn into this storm, and the lawman closing in from the ridge without anyone below. Knowing he was there, the leaders, hand curled fully around his gun. The silent rider's gaze hardened. The nervous rider's eyes widened. The woman's heart hammered in her chest. Apache warrior drew a slow breath, pulled the bowstring back, and chose his mark. Knowing that once the first move was made, nothing about any of their lives would remain the same. The Apache warrior held his bow steady, as the arrow drawn tight and silent. The leader's fingers twitched near his gun, testing the moment, weighing whether to risk the first move. The nervous rider shifted in his saddle, boots scraping the stirrups. The big silent rider lowered his head slightly, calculating where the warrior might try to dodge if the fight exploded. Not a single man breathed normally. Even the wind seemed to pause, caught between the threat of violence and the tension building through the cold night. Behind the warrior, the young woman tried to push herself upright, but her body was too weak. She could only watch the silhouettes of the riders outlined by the dying firelight. She whispered his name, soft and uncertain. He did not look back, but she saw his shoulders tighten, as if her voice reminded him of the weight of the moment. She felt guilt gnaw at her. These men chased her, not him. Yet he stood there, risking everything because he refused to leave her behind the way they had. The leader slowly spread his hands, pretending to ease the moment. But the Apache warrior saw the deceit in his posture. The leader's thumb stayed too close to the hammer of his pistol. His boots stayed angled for a quick step. His eyes were sharp, not relaxed. He was waiting for the slightest shift. The warrior had fought men like him before, men who chose impulse over honor. Just then, a soft grunt echoed from deeper in the forest. The horses of the riders lifted their heads, ears turning toward the sound. The leader stiffened, unsure if the noise came from an animal or a person. The Apache warrior recognized it instantly. It was the grunt of a horse struggling under heavy weight. That meant the rest of the gang was nearby with the wagon and the locked wooden box. And if the wagon was that close, then danger was even closer. The leader barked an order at his two men, telling them to spread out. He wanted to corner the warrior, force him into a tight spot where escape was impossible. The big silent rider obeyed, pulling his horse to the right, while the nervous rider circled left, though his hands trembled on the reins. The Apache warrior pivoted his stance, adjusting his aim. He knew that once they surrounded him, it would have only seconds before shots filled the night. The woman's breathing quickened behind him. She tried again to sit up, pushing through the pain. She felt helpless, forced to watch a man who owed her nothing put himself in the path of danger. She wished she could shout at the riders, tell them to stop this madness. But even if she did, they would not listen. Fear and greed had pulled them too far. Up on the ridge, the lawman Calder watched the scene unfold from between two pines. His heart hammered as he realized what he was seeing. The man in front of the shelter was an Apache warrior standing alone against three armed men. Behind him, someone lay injured. Calder did not know what charges these riders carried, but he had tracked their trail across miles of rough land. He saw their cruelty in the way they moved, in the way they handled their horses. Everything in his gut told him he needed to act soon, or blood would stain the ground. But if he fired too early, he risked hitting the wrong man. If he waited too long, he might watch an innocent person fall. He crouched lower, gripping his revolver tight. He had seen many standoffs, but something about this one felt different. It felt like the moment before a storm shatters the sky. The Apache warrior spoke suddenly, his voice calm, but cutting through the tension. He warned the riders that a fight would only end badly for them. He told them this forest did not favor men who acted without honor. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made even the nervous rider hesitate. The leader scoffed. He called the warrior's words foolish. He said no one would know what happened in the forest tonight, and no one would care. He lifted his chin in arrogant confidence, convinced that power belonged to whoever held the gun fastest. But the warrior saw something the leader did not. A shadow shifted on the far ridge. A glint of metal flickered near a pine tree. Someone else was watching. Someone else had a stake in this. The warrior did not know whether the newcomer was friend or foe, but he recognized the disciplined posture of a trained marksman. That meant the situation was no longer only between him and the riders. It was expanding, and quickly. The big silent rider moved first, pulling his gun from the holster with a swift motion. The Apache warrior reacted instantly, aiming his arrow at the rider's hand. The silent rider froze, knowing the arrow would strike before he could level his gun. The nervous rider's breath rattled in his throat. He kept his revolver half-raised, but dared not lift it higher. The leader's lip curled. He had counted on his men to pressure the warrior, but now they hesitated. His frustration flared, and he took a bold step forward. Gun angled halfway out of its holster. Before the moment could break, the wounded woman behind the warrior struggled to her knees and shouted at the riders not to hurt him. Her voice was thin but desperate. The leader glared at her with raw fury. He cursed under his breath, realizing she still had the strength to interfere. Her cry echoed off the rock walls, rising into the trees. Birds startled from the branches above. The sound bounced down the trail where the rest of the gang waited with their wagon. Two more riders, startled by her voice, urged their horses forward, thinking something had gone wrong with their leader. Their silhouettes grew larger in the darkness as they approached. Now the warrior faced not 3 men, but 5. The lawman Calder saw those additional riders and felt the urgency tighten like a rope around his chest. This was spiraling faster than he anticipated. He drew his revolver quietly, choosing his moment. He could not let the Apache warrior fight 5 men alone. He also could not allow gunfire to erupt while a wounded woman lay unprotected. At the same time, the warrior sensed the additional riders arriving. He adjusted his position slightly, stepping in front of the woman with even more resolve. The fire cast long shadows behind him, making him appear taller, stronger, like a guardian standing at the mouth of some ancient world. The leader's confidence returned as he saw his men approaching. He lifted his gun fully now, pointing it directly at the warrior. The silent rider tensed, ready to strike if ordered. The nervous rider whispered a shaky warning, saying they should be careful. But the leader did not care. All he saw was a threat standing between him and control. The woman grasped the warrior's coat, her fingers trembling. She begged him not to let himself be hurt because of her. He looked down only briefly, long enough to tell her that her life mattered, that leaving her behind was never an option for him. The leader gave the final signal. Everything was about to burst. Calder steadied his aim from the ridge. The new riders closed in fast. The woman clung to the coat, tears burning her eyes. The Apache warrior breathed deeply, the bowstring pulled to its limit. The arrow aimed with deadly accuracy. The leader's finger pressed the trigger, and the forest braced for the moment when the night would explode into fire. Steel and fate. The climax had finally begun to rise, and not a single soul standing in that cold forest knew who would walk out alive. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, a sharp crack split the air from the ridge above. The gun leaped out of his hand as a bullet struck its barrel, sending sparks into the cold night. The sudden shot startled every rider, and even the horses jerked back with frightened whinnies. The Apache warrior did not waste a moment. His arrow flew straight and true, striking the silent rider's gun hand just enough to knock the revolver away without causing grave harm. The man cried out, clutching his hand as the weapon clattered onto the rocks. The nervous rider panicked, dropping his reins entirely. His horse stumbled sideways. The two new riders skidded to a halt at the scene unfolding before them. Confusion swept over the group like a hard wind, and for the first time the leader's confidence cracked. He looked toward the ridge, searching for whoever fired that unexpected warning shot. The lawman Calder stepped forward from behind a pine tree, revolver raised with steady aim. He called out his authority, demanding the gang surrender their weapons and stay right where they were. His voice was strong, echoing across the open space below. The men stiffened as they recognized the badge pinned to his coat. The leader cursed under his breath, realizing they were trapped between the Apache warrior below and the lawman above. The woman clung to the warrior's arm. Relief washed across her face, though fear still trembled in her breath. The warrior stepped slightly in front of her again, shielding her in case the gang tried something desperate. Calder slid down the ridge with practiced care, boots crunching across leaves as he reached the clearing. The leader raised his hands slowly, though anger darkened his eyes. He spat out excuses, claiming he only wanted to help the woman, claiming the warrior misunderstood. Calder did not believe a single word. He had tracked the gang across broken land and found enough proof of their crimes to know exactly what they were capable of. He ordered all 5 men to drop their weapons. One by one, they obeyed. Even the big rider, despite the pain in his hand, let his weapon fall. The nervous rider collapsed into a sitting position on his saddle, shaking like a leaf. The two new riders exchanged uneasy glances, unable to argue with a trained lawman and an Apache warrior standing side by side. With the gang disarmed, Calder turned to the woman. His voice softened as he asked if she needed medical help. She nodded but told him the warrior had already saved her life. Calder gave the warrior a respectful nod, as if acknowledging the bravery he had witnessed from afar. The warrior remained calm, bow lowered now, but still ready if needed. He did not seek praise. His only concern was the woman's safety. Calder approached her carefully and checked her injuries. She was exhausted, bruised, and cold, but alive. He handed her a warm blanket from his saddlebag and she wrapped it around herself. Finally feeling warmth return to her bones, Calder then instructed the riders to dismount and sit together where he could watch them. The leader resisted at first, but the lawman's steady aim changed his mind. Once they were settled, Calder walked with the warrior a few paces away to speak privately. He explained how he had been tracking the gang, how they were wanted for robbery across several towns, and how the stolen goods inside the locked wooden box were part of a freight shipment never delivered to its rightful owners. The warrior listened carefully and nodded. He had suspected the box carried something valuable, but now the pieces fit together. The gang had grown paranoid because they knew the law was closing in on them. Calder thanked him for protecting the woman. He said without the warrior's intervention, she would never have survived the night. The warrior simply replied that no one deserved to be left behind in the forest. Calder agreed. The woman tried standing, but her legs wobbled. The warrior lifted her gently, helping her sit against one of the large rocks. Her eyes softened when she looked up at him. She whispered that she didn't know how she would ever repay him. He told her she did not need to repay anything. She had endured enough hardship on her own, as dawn began to push soft light through the trees. Calder searched the riders' saddlebags and found the locked box exactly where the woman said it would be. He opened it with a key taken from the leader's coat, revealing stacks of bonds and coins. The woman stared at the shine of it all, shocked that such wealth had been riding beside her while she suffered. Calder secured the box and prepared to escort the gang to town. But before leaving, he asked the warrior if he wanted anything in return for his help. The warrior shook his head. He said his people lived by the simple rule of doing what was right. The woman's eyes filled with emotion. She asked Calder if she could be taken somewhere safe rather than left to travel alone. Calder agreed immediately. He offered her space in the wagon he planned to use for transporting the gang. She hesitated, glancing toward the warrior. Her heart twisted at the idea of parting from him so suddenly. especially when he had become the anchor that kept her alive. The warrior saw her concern. He told her she did not have to fear any longer. He said Calder was a man she could trust. She nodded slowly, though her eyes carried a quiet longing. Calder helped her into the wagon and ensured. She was resting comfortably under the blanket. The Apache warrior stepped close, giving her a small pouch of herbs to help with pain and strength. She held it tightly, knowing it came from him. Her voice quivered as she thanked him again. Her gratitude carried warmth, hope, something deeper blossoming within her spirit. Before departing, Calder approached the warrior one last time. He told him the frontier needed more men like him. The warrior gave a modest reply, saying he was simply answering the call of the land. With that, the two parted with mutual respect. The gang was bound and placed under watch. Calder mounted his horse, ready to lead them back to justice. The wagon creaked as it rolled forward, carrying the woman toward a safer future. She looked back over her shoulder, eyes searching for the warrior one last time. He stood tall near the rock shelter, framed by the rising sun. When he lifted his hand in a calm farewell, she smiled through the ache in her heart. As the forest quieted again, the warrior returned to the ridge, watching the caravan move slowly along the trail. He felt no regret, only peace. He had done what the land asked of him. Somewhere in his thoughts, he held hope that their paths might cross again someday. Perhaps when she was strong enough to travel on her own, the woman, leaning against the wagon boards, closed her eyes and whispered his name softly. She promised herself that she would not forget the man who found her when the world left her to die. She promised that when she reached a new settlement, her life would begin again in a way she never believed possible. And far behind them, the forest remained still, carrying the memory of the night when a cry for help rose through the cold trees and an Apache warrior answered with courage, honor, and a kindness that shaped the rest of their lives. The story ended with hope rising, justice served, and the promise of a brighter path ahead for the woman who survived and the warrior who chose to save her.